Commander Ethan Cole stood at the observation window of the Earth Alliance flagship and watched the distant stars burn. 3 years of war had left humanity broken. 40 billion people dead across 12 colony worlds. The Velthari Empire had pushed them to the edge of extinction, and everyone knew it. The door behind him opened. Admiral Patricia Lane walked in with a datapad in her hand. Her face looked tired. Everyone looked tired these days. "They have accepted our request for peace talks," she said. Ethan turned around. He did not smile. There was nothing to smile about yet. "What are their terms?" Admiral Lane looked at the datapad for a long moment before she answered. "They want a marriage alliance. One of our commanders must marry one of theirs. A symbolic union to bind our species together." Ethan felt his stomach drop. Marriage alliances were old, ancient, even by human standards. He did not think any civilization still practiced such things. "Who do they want?" "You," the Admiral said. "They asked for you by name. You destroyed their fleet at Proxima. You held the line at New Berlin when everyone else retreated. They consider you the greatest human warrior they have faced. They want you married to their greatest warrior." "And who is that?" Admiral Lane hesitated. "High Commander Lyra of the Velthari Third Fleet." Ethan felt cold wash over him. He knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Lyra had led the assault on the Kepler colonies. She had killed 2 million humans in a single day. Her ships had burned cities while her soldiers marched through the ashes. "They want me to marry her?" Ethan asked quietly. "Yes." He walked back to the window and looked at the stars again. Somewhere out there, millions of humans were hiding in bunkers, praying for the war to end. Children were growing up without parents. Families were broken and scattered across the galaxy. If he said no, the war would continue. More people would die. More worlds would burn. "I will do it," he said. Admiral Lane stepped closer. "Ethan, you do not have to agree to this. We can find another way." "There is no other way," he replied. "You know it as well as I do. Our fleet is half destroyed. Our factories cannot build ships fast enough. In 6 months, the Velthari will push through our last defenses and reach Earth itself." He turned to face her. "If my marriage can stop that, then I will pay the price." The Admiral looked at him with something like sorrow in her eyes. "You are a good man, Ethan Cole." "I am a tired man," he said, "and I want the killing to stop." 3 weeks later, Ethan stood on a neutral space station in the empty zone between human and Velthari territory. The station was old, built by a species that had gone extinct long before humanity reached the stars. Its halls were cold and gray, and the air tasted of dust and metal. Ethan wore his dress uniform. It felt strange to wear something so formal after years of battle armor and dirty combat gear. He had not slept well the night before. He kept thinking about what he was about to do. The ceremony room was large and empty, except for a few officials from both sides. There were no decorations, no flowers, no music. This was not a celebration. It was a transaction. The doors at the far end of the room opened, and she walked in. High Commander Lyra was tall, nearly as tall as Ethan himself. Her skin was pale blue, smooth and almost luminous in the dim light. Her eyes were silver, like polished mirrors that reflected nothing. She wore ceremonial armor that gleamed with symbols of her victories. Her white hair was pulled back tight against her head. She was beautiful in a cold and terrible way. She was also the woman who had killed millions of his people. Lyra walked toward him with perfect grace. Her face showed no emotion at all. She stopped 3 feet away and looked at him with those silver eyes. "Commander Ethan Cole," she said. Her voice was clear and precise. She spoke English perfectly, without any accent. "I am High Commander Lyra of the Velthari Third Fleet. I have come to fulfill the terms of our peace agreement." "I know who you are," Ethan said. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or maybe it was contempt. He could not tell. The Valkyrie official began reading the terms of the marriage contract. It was long and complicated, full of legal language about treaties and territorial boundaries and trade agreements. Ethan barely listened. He kept his eyes on Lyra, and she kept her eyes on him. When the reading was done, they were asked to speak the ritual words of union. Ethan spoke first, promising to honor the treaty, to stand beside his wife in public, to represent the bond between their peoples. His voice was steady, but his heart felt like stone. Lyra spoke next. Her words were identical to his, delivered in the same flat tone. She promised nothing she was not required to promise. There was no warmth in her voice, no softness in her face. When the ceremony ended, they were declared married under both human and Valkyrie law. The officials shook hands and exchanged documents. Everyone seemed relieved that no one had drawn a weapon. Ethan and Lyra were escorted to their shared quarters on the station. They would stay here for one night before traveling to the diplomatic vessel that would carry them between their territories for the next year. The quarters were small but comfortable. There was a living area, a bathroom, and a bedroom with a large bed. Someone had placed fresh flowers on the table, a human tradition that seemed out of place here. Lyra stopped at the entrance to the bedroom and turned to face Ethan. Her silver eyes were unreadable. "I will honor the treaty," she said. Her voice was cold and formal. "I will stand beside you at ceremonies. I will speak well of humans when my people are watching. I will play the role of your wife in all public matters." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand. But I will not share your bed," she continued. "I will not pretend there is love between us. I will not forget what your people have done to mine, and I expect you will not forget what I have done to yours. This is a political arrangement. Nothing more." She touched a panel on the wall, and a partition slid out, dividing the bedroom in half. She walked to her side without another word and sealed the partition behind her. Ethan stood alone in the silence. He looked at the partition, at the flowers on the table, at the empty space where his wife should have been. He had expected many things when he agreed to this marriage. He had expected awkwardness and tension. He had expected cold formality and political games. But he had not expected to feel so completely alone. He sat down on his side of the bed and stared at the wall. The war was over. Peace had been bought. Billions of lives had been saved. But as he sat there in the quiet of that empty room, Ethan Cole realized that peace had a cost he had not fully understood. He had given up his future, his freedom, and any hope of happiness. And the woman on the other side of that wall hated everything he was. He did not sleep that night. He just sat and watched the stars through the small window, wondering what the morning would bring. The diplomatic vessel Unity was a large ship built specifically for this mission. It had quarters for both human and Valkyrie crew members, meeting rooms for negotiations, and a grand hall for public ceremonies. Everything was designed to show that both species were equal, partners in peace. Ethan walked the corridors of the ship every morning. It helped him think. It also helped him avoid spending too much time in the quarters he shared with Lyra. They had been married for 3 weeks now. In that time, they had attended 4 public ceremonies, 2 treaty negotiations, and 1 formal dinner with officials from both sides. In public, they stood together like proper partners. They smiled when cameras pointed at them. They spoke polite words about hope and cooperation. In private, they barely spoke at all. The partition in their quarters remained sealed every night. Lyra would return from her duties, walk straight to her side of the room, and disappear until morning. Ethan would hear her moving around sometimes, the soft sounds of footsteps or running water. But she never opened the partition. She never invited conversation. He tried not to take it personally. He reminded himself that she had lost people in the war too. The Valkyrie had suffered millions of casualties. Her own brother had died fighting human forces at the Battle of Vega. She had reasons for her coldness. But understanding did not make the silence easier to bear. One morning, Ethan noticed something interesting. Lyra always woke early, before the artificial sunrise that lit the ship's corridors. She would leave their quarters and walk to a small observation deck on the lower level. She would stand there alone for exactly 30 minutes, staring out at the stars, before returning to begin her official duties. He watched this routine for several days before he decided to act. He went to the ship's kitchen and requested a traditional Valkyrie morning drink. The cook looked at him strangely, but prepared it without question. It was a warm beverage made from a plant that grew only on the Valkyrie homeworld. Something like tea, but with a sweeter taste. The next morning, Ethan woke early and placed the drink outside Lyra's door before she left for her observation ritual. He did not knock. He did not wait for thanks. He simply left it there and went about his day. That evening, when they passed each other in the corridor, Lyra paused for just a moment. Her silver eyes met his. "The drink was adequate," she said. Then she walked away. Ethan smiled to himself. It was not much, but it was something. He continued the ritual every morning. Some days, it was the Valkyrie drink. Other days, it was human coffee or a small pastry from Earth. He never asked if she wanted these things. He never expected her to thank him. He simply offered what he could and accepted whatever she chose to give in return. Over the next few weeks, small things began to change. Lyra started greeting him in the morning with a single Valkyrie word. He learned that it meant something like acknowledged or recognized. It was not warm, but it was not hostile either. He responded by learning 3 more Valkyrie phrases. Good morning. Safe travels. Rest well. He spoke them carefully, trying to get the pronunciation right. His accent was terrible, and he knew it. One morning, he caught the faintest hint of amusement in Lyra's eyes when he mangled a particularly difficult word. She did not laugh. She did not smile. But something in her expression softened for just a moment. It gave him hope. The real change came on a night. When everything almost fell apart, Ethan was in the engineering section, reviewing reports with the ship's technical crew, when the emergency alarms started screaming. Red lights flashed everywhere. The ship shuddered as something went wrong deep in its core. Reactor malfunction, the chief engineer shouted. Coolant system is failing. If we do not fix it in the next 10 minutes, the whole ship will breach. Ethan ran toward the reactor room. The corridors were filled with smoke and panicking crew members. He pushed through them all, following the emergency lights to the source of the problem. When he arrived, he found Lyra already there. She was standing waist-deep in an open maintenance hatch, her hands buried in the reactor's coolant conduits. Plasma was leaking from broken seals, burning her arms wherever it touched. Her face was twisted with pain, but she did not stop working. What are you doing? Ethan shouted over the noise of the alarms. The automatic systems have failed, she replied through gritted teeth. Someone must manually redirect the coolant flow. I am the only one here with the technical knowledge to do it. Ethan looked at her burns, at the plasma still spraying from the broken seals. If she stayed in there much longer, she would lose her arms. Maybe her life. He did not hesitate. He climbed into the hatch beside her. Tell me what to do, he said. Lyra's silver eyes widened in surprise. For a moment, she seemed about to argue. Then she nodded. Take that valve on your left. When I say now, turn it counterclockwise as hard as you can. Ethan grabbed the valve. The metal was hot enough to burn through his gloves. He felt his skin blister beneath the fabric. He did not let go. Now, Lyra said. He turned the valve. She turned another valve on her side. The plasma flow shifted, and the reactor's temperature began to drop. The alarms continued for another long minute, then finally fell silent. They climbed out of the hatch together, both covered in burns and coolant fluid. The engineering team rushed in to take over the repairs. A medical team arrived moments later to treat their injuries. In the medical bay, Ethan sat on a bed while a doctor wrapped bandages around his hands. Lyra sat on the bed across from him, her arms covered in healing gel. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Lyra broke the silence. "You could have waited for the engineering team," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost uncertain. "You did not need to risk yourself." Ethan looked at his bandaged hands. "Neither did you. It is my duty to protect this ship and this mission. Then we share the same duty." Lyra stared at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her silver eyes, something he had not seen before. It was not warmth exactly, but it was not coldness either. "You are a strange human," she said, "so I have been told." That night, when they returned to their quarters, the partition remained sealed as always. But something had changed in the silence between them. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people who had bled together and survived. Ethan lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling. His hands hurt beneath the bandages. His body ached from the stress of the emergency. But for the first time since his wedding, he did not feel quite so alone. The Velthary homeworld was nothing like Earth. Its sky was deep purple, lit by a sun that burned cooler and redder than humanity's star. The buildings were made of crystal that had been grown over thousands of years, twisted into shapes that defied human understanding of architecture. Everything was beautiful and alien and cold. Ethan felt like an insect walking through a cathedral built for gods. The diplomatic summit had been planned for months. Leaders from both species would gather here to discuss trade agreements, territorial boundaries, and the long-term future of the peace treaty. Ethan and Lyra were expected to attend as the living symbols of cooperation between their peoples. For Ethan, it was the first time he had set foot on an alien world. For Lyra, it was her home. "Stay close to me," she said as they walked through the crystalline corridors of the Grand Palace. "There are many here who do not approve of this marriage. They will look for any excuse to insult you." "I can handle insults," Ethan said. "You do not understand. Among my people, insults must be answered. If you fail to respond properly, it will be seen as weakness. If you respond incorrectly, it could undo everything we have worked for." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then tell me how to respond." Lyra glanced at him with something like surprise. "You are willing to learn?" "I am willing to do whatever it takes to make this work." She studied him for a moment, then began explaining the complex rules of Velthary social interaction. There were different responses for different levels of insult, different gestures for different situations, different words that could turn an enemy into a friend or a friend into an enemy. Ethan listened carefully and tried to remember everything. His head hurt from the effort. The Velthary had 10,000 years of civilization behind them. Humans had only been in space for 300 years. He felt like a child trying to understand the politics of ancient empires. But he did not complain. He just kept listening. The summit began the next morning. Ethan and Lyra sat at a long table with delegates from both species. The discussions were slow and careful, every word measured for its political weight. Ethan said little. He watched and learned and let Lyra take the lead when speaking to her own people. She was impressive in this setting. Her voice carried authority that silenced entire rooms. Her arguments were precise and logical. She defended the treaty with the same fierce determination she had once used to attack human colonies. Ethan found himself admiring her despite everything. She was his enemy, his wife, his partner in this strange arrangement. And she was very, very good at what she did. The trouble came at the formal dinner that evening. The dining hall was massive. filled with hundreds of Veltari nobles and officials. Ethan and Lara sat at the head table with the highest-ranking members of the Veltari government. The food was strange but edible. The conversation was polite but tense. Halfway through the meal, an old Veltari general approached their table. "Every year now, at a dance." Halfway through the meal, an old Veltari general approached their table. His name was Vorath, and Ethan recognized him from intelligence reports. Vorath had lost his only son at the Battle of Kepler Station, killed by human defenders in the final hours of the assault. Vorath stopped directly in front of Ethan and stared down at him with burning hatred in his eyes. "So this is the human they gave you?" Vorath said to Lyra. His voice was loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "A small, weak creature from a small, weak species. Tell me, High Commander, does it perform tricks? Does it beg for scraps at your table?" The hall fell silent. Every eye turned toward them. Ethan felt his blood run hot, but he kept his face calm. He remembered what Lyra had taught him about insults and responses. This was a test. Everyone was watching to see how he would react. He stood slowly, meeting Vorath's eyes without flinching. "General Vorath," Ethan said carefully, using the formal address Lyra had taught him. "I understand your loss. War takes from all of us. I have lost friends and brothers too. But the war is over now, and we are trying to build something better." Vorath's face twisted with contempt. "You dare speak to me of loss? Your species is nothing but animals. You should be grateful we allowed you to survive at all." "I am grateful," Ethan said quietly. "Grateful that both our peoples chose peace over extinction. Grateful that children on both sides will grow up without the sound of bombs. Grateful that your son's death and the deaths of millions of humans might actually mean something." Vorath stepped closer, his clawed hand rising as if to strike, and then Lyra was there, standing between them like a wall of ice. "General Vorath," she said, and her voice could have frozen stars. "You forget yourself. Commander Cole is my husband, bound to me by treaty and law. An insult to him is an insult to my house, my fleet, and my personal honor. Do you wish to challenge all three?" The hall held its breath. Vorath's hand trembled in the air. His eyes burned with rage, but something else flickered there too. Fear. "I meant no challenge to your honor, High Commander," he said finally, lowering his hand. "I was merely testing the human's worth." "His worth is not yours to test," Lyra replied. "He stood beside me in battle. He has bled for this peace. That is more than many in this room can claim." Vorath retreated with a stiff bow, his face dark with humiliation. The murmurs in the hall slowly resumed. The moment had passed. Later that night, Ethan and Lyra walked back to their guest quarters in silence. The corridors of the palace were empty at this hour, lit only by the soft glow of the crystal walls. "You did not need to defend me," Ethan said finally. Lyra did not slow her pace. "Yes, I did. I could have handled him." "You handled him well," she admitted. "Better than I expected." But Vorath would not have stopped at words. He wanted to provoke a fight so he could kill you legally. I could not allow that. Ethan processed this information. "So you saved my life. I protected the treaty. Is that all?" Lara stopped walking. She turned to face him, her silver eyes unreadable in the dim light. "I do not know," she said quietly. "I have been asking myself the same question." They stood there for a long moment, two former enemies trying to understand what they were becoming. "I am not your enemy, Lyra," Ethan said. "I never wanted to be." "I know," she replied. "That is what confuses me most." When they reached their quarters, Lyra paused at the entrance to her side of the room. She looked at the partition that had divided them for months. "I am not ready to remove it," she said. "Not yet. But perhaps we could leave it open tonight. Just open, nothing more. Ethan nodded. I would like that. The partition slid aside, revealing the full room for the first time since their wedding. Lyra walked to her bed and lay down. Ethan walked to his dot. The space between them was still there, but it no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a bridge waiting to be crossed. For the first time, Ethan fell asleep with hope in his heart. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and Ethan had begun to think that peace might actually last. He was wrong. The news came at 3 in the morning, ship time. Ethan was awake, reading reports at his desk, when the emergency transmission cut through all channels. He watched in horror as images filled his screen. A human colony called New Haven had been attacked. Ships bearing Valkyrie markings had descended from orbit and opened fire on civilian targets. The death toll was already in the thousands and climbing. By the time Ethan reached the command center, the Unity was in chaos. UN officers were shouting demands for retaliation. Valkyrie officers were defending their people, insisting it must be a mistake. Captain Peters stood at the center of it all, trying to maintain order. Silence, the captain bellowed. Everyone, silence. The room slowly quieted. All eyes turned to the main view screen, where the attack footage continued to play on loop. We have confirmed the attack, Captain Peters said. 17 Valkyrie warships struck New Haven approximately 4 hours ago. Current casualty estimates are between 8 and 12,000 civilians. A human lieutenant slammed his fist against the console. Those murderers. They never wanted peace. This whole treaty was just a trick to make us lower our guard. That is not true, a Valkyrie officer shot back. The Third Fleet would never authorize such an attack. This must be criminals, rogue elements acting without orders. Your fleet markings are on those ships, the lieutenant shouted. Your weapons killed those people. How can you stand there and deny it? The argument threatened to spiral out of control. Ethan could see it happening. Months of careful diplomacy were about to collapse in this room. Enough, he said, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade. Everyone turned to look at him. Commander Cole, the human who had married the enemy, the symbol of peace that might already be dead. Ethan walked to the center of the room and faced both sides. I want answers before I want accusations. Lieutenant, pull up everything we have on those attacking ships. Registration codes, communication intercepts, everything. The lieutenant hesitated, then started working his console. Ethan turned to the senior Valkyrie officer. Contact your command. Find out if any ships have gone missing or been reported stolen. I want confirmation within the hour. The Valkyrie officer nodded and hurried away. The door to the command center opened, and Lyra walked in. She had been in her quarters when the alarm sounded, and she still wore her sleeping clothes beneath a hastily thrown military jacket. Her silver eyes swept the room, taking in the tension instantly. Report, she said. Ethan told her everything they knew. Her face grew darker with every word. This is not our fleet, she said when he finished. I know every commander in the Third. None of them would order an attack on civilians. Someone is trying to destroy the peace. Then help us prove it, Ethan said. The next few hours were the longest of Ethan's life. Communications flew between the Unity and both homeworlds. Admirals demanded war. Politicians demanded investigations. The galaxy watched and waited to see if the fragile peace would survive. The proof came just before dawn. The attacking ships had been tracked to a hidden base in unclaimed space. Intelligence reports identified them as vessels that had been decommissioned months ago, officially destroyed in the war's final battles. Someone had salvaged them, repaired them, and launched them against New Haven while flying. Valkyrie colors. That someone was General Varth. The old general had spent months gathering followers who shared his hatred of the peace treaty. He had rebuilt a private fleet in secret, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His plan was simple. Attack a human colony, make it look like the Velthri had broken the treaty, and watch as both species destroyed each other in renewed war. When this information reached the Unity, the command center fell silent. Everyone looked at their screens, processing what they had learned. Admiral Lane's face appeared on the main view screen, transmitted from Earth Alliance headquarters. "The Council is divided," she said. "Half want to respond to Vorath's attack with military force against all Velthri targets. Half want to give the treaty one more chance. They have requested that Commander Cole and High Commander Lyra address the emergency assembly. Both assemblies, human and Velthri, will be watching." Ethan looked at Lyra. She looked back at him. "Together," he said quietly. "Together," she agreed. 1 hour later, they stood on a stage in the Unity's Grand Hall. Cameras broadcast their images to billions of viewers across both civilizations. The fate of the galaxy rested on what they would say in the next few minutes. Lyra spoke first. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of everything she had done and everything she hoped to undo. "I am High Commander Lyra of the Velthri Third Fleet. 3 years ago, I led the assault on the Kepler colonies. I gave the orders that killed 2 million humans. I cannot take back what I did. I cannot bring back the dead. I can only tell you what I have learned since then." She paused, and Ethan saw something in her eyes he had never seen before. Vulnerability. "I married a human," she continued. "I expected to hate him. I expected to spend my life beside a primitive creature who could never understand duty or honor. I was wrong. Commander Cole has shown me more courage and integrity than many of my own people. He has taught me that peace is not weakness. Peace is the hardest fight of all." She turned to face the Velthri delegation directly. "General Vorath and his followers are criminals who have betrayed everything our people stand for. They want us to return to war because they cannot accept change. They cannot accept that enemies can become allies, that hatred can become something else. I will not let them succeed. I stand with my husband. I stand with the treaty. I stand with peace." The hall was silent. Now it was Ethan's turn. He stepped forward and looked into the cameras, knowing that billions of humans were watching him. Humans who had lost families at Kepler. Humans who had just lost loved ones at New Haven. Humans who had every reason to hate the Velthri and want blood. "I know what you want," he said. "I know you want revenge. I know you want to make them pay for every life they have taken from us. I felt the same way once. When I watched Kepler burn, I swore I would destroy every Velthri I ever met." He let the words hang in the air before continuing. "But revenge will not bring back our dead. More war will only create more orphans, more widows, more broken families on both sides. General Vorath wants us to fight. He wants us to destroy ourselves while he watches from the shadows. I refuse to give him what he wants." Ethan reached out and took Lyra's hand. It was the first time he had touched her publicly since their wedding. Her fingers were cool against his palm, but they did not pull away. "We will hunt Vorath together," he said. "Human and Velthri, side by side. We will bring him to justice, and we will show the galaxy that peace is stronger than hatred. This is our promise to you." The cameras captured the image of the human commander and his Velthri wife standing together, hands joined, facing the darkness together. The voting began immediately after. It took 3 hours for both assemblies to reach their decisions. The treaty would hold. War had been averted. For now, later that night, in their quarters aboard the Unity, Lyra sat beside Ethan on the small couch. The partition that had once divided them had been removed weeks ago. There was no wall between them anymore. "You took my hand," she said. "I did. That was not part of the plan." "No," Ethan admitted. "It was not." Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan put his arm around her and held her close. Outside their window, the stars burned with the light of a galaxy that had almost torn itself apart. But tonight, at least, the darkness had been pushed back, and they had pushed it back together. 3 years had passed since Ethan Cole married a woman he was supposed to hate. He stood on the surface of a new world, breathing air that had never filled human lungs before. The planet was called New Accord, chosen specifically because it belonged to neither species. It lay in the empty space between human and Velthari territory, a world that both peoples would share equally. Today was the inauguration ceremony, the first joint colony in the history of two civilizations, a place where human children and Velthari children would grow up side by side, learning from each other, building a future together. Ethan could hardly believe it was real. Behind him, ships from both fleets hung in orbit like guardian angels. Human destroyers floated beside Velthari cruisers, their weapons cold and silent. They had come to protect this world, not to fight each other. Some of those ships had faced each other in battle just 4 years ago. Now their crews shared meals in the same mess halls. The ceremony was held in a great plaza at the center of the colony's first city. Thousands of settlers from both species gathered to witness the moment. There were families with young children, scientists eager to explore a new world, engineers ready to build, farmers ready to plant. Hope was everywhere Ethan looked. Lyra stood beside him on the platform, dressed in formal robes that blended human and Velthari styles. Her white hair caught the sunlight, and her silver eyes reflected the faces of the crowd below. She was beautiful. Not in the cold, terrible way he had first seen her. Beautiful in the way that a sunrise was beautiful after a long night. Beautiful in the way that hope was. Beautiful after years of despair. The ceremony began with speeches from officials on both sides. They spoke of sacrifice and vision, of the war that had been, and the peace that had grown from its ashes. They spoke of Ethan and Lyra, the couple who had shown both species what was possible when enemies chose to become partners. When the speeches ended, it was Ethan's turn to speak. He stepped forward and looked out at the sea of faces. Human faces, Velthari faces, all watching him with the same expression of anticipation. When I agreed to marry High Commander Lyra 3 years ago, he said, I did it because I had no choice. The war had taken everything from us. We were losing. If peace required my freedom, I was willing to pay that price. He paused, letting the memory of those dark days wash over him. I expected my marriage to be a prison. I expected to spend my life beside a stranger who despised everything I was. And for a while, that is exactly what it felt like. Lyra and I lived in the same quarters, but never spoke. We stood together in public, but kept walls between us in private. We were symbols, not partners. Treaty obligations, not husband and wife. He glanced at Lyra. She met his eyes and gave him the smallest nod. But something changed, Ethan continued. It did not happen all at once. It happened in small moments. A cup of tea left outside a door. A hand reached out during an emergency. A word of defense spoken when no one else would speak. Piece by piece, we learned to see each other as more than enemies. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. Lyra taught me that the Velthari are not monsters. They are people with families and dreams and fears, just like us. They love their children. They mourn their dead. They hope for better futures. They are different from us in many ways, but in the ways that matter most, they are exactly the same. He turned to face the Velthari portion of the crowd directly. And I hope that Lyra has taught her people something about humanity. I hope she has shown them that we are not the primitive animals they once believed us to be. We are stubborn, yes. We are emotional. We hold on to hope long after logic tells us to give up. But those qualities are not weaknesses. They are our greatest strengths. Lyra stepped forward to stand beside him. Her voice carried clear across the plaza. 3 years ago, I believed humanity was a mistake of evolution. A species too young and too foolish to deserve a place among the stars. I believed the peace treaty was a temporary measure, something that would delay the inevitable war rather than prevent it. I was wrong about all of it. She looked at the human faces in the crowd with an expression that held no trace of the coldness Ethan had once known. Humans taught me something my own people had forgotten. They taught me that strength does not come from technology or military power. True strength comes from the ability to change, to grow, to admit when you are wrong and try to do better. My species has existed for 10,000 years, and in all that time, we never learned that lesson. Humans learned it in 300. She reached out and took Ethan's hand. The crowd murmured at the gesture. My husband did not conquer me, Lyra said. He did not defeat me in battle or force me to submit. He simply showed me, day after day, what it looked like to choose connection over fear. He never demanded anything from me. He only offered. And eventually, I chose to accept. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. 3 years ago, her touch had been ice. Now it was warmth. Now it was home. This colony represents everything we fought for, he said to the crowd. Not the war, the peace. This is what matters. Children growing up together. Families building lives side by side. Two species learning from each other instead of destroying each other. This is the future we chose when we refused to let hatred win. The crowd erupted in applause. Human hands clapped while BedHFY made their own gesture of approval, a soft clicking sound that filled the plaza like rain on leaves. The sound mixed together into something new, a sound that had never existed before in the history of either species. Later that evening, after the ceremonies had ended and the celebrations had begun, Ethan and Lyra walked alone through the colony's first garden. Plants from both worlds grew here, carefully tended to thrive in the new environment. Red earth roses bloomed beside blue BedHFY crystal flowers. The scents mixed together into something sweet and strange. Do you remember our wedding night? Lyra asked. Ethan smiled. I remember a partition. I was afraid of you, she admitted. Not because you were dangerous, because you were kind. I had been taught that kindness was weakness, that enemies could never be trusted. That peace was just another word for surrender. When you showed me kindness, I did not know how to respond. And now? Lyra stopped walking and turned to face him. The light of the setting sun painted her blue skin in shades of gold and amber. Now I understand that kindness is the bravest thing a person can offer. It takes courage to reach out to someone who might hurt you. It takes strength to keep trying when every attempt is rejected. You showed me that courage every day for months. You never gave up, even when I gave you every reason to. She placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. I was not ready to share a bed with you on our wedding night. I was not ready to be your wife. But I am ready now. I have been ready for a long time. Ethan pulled her close and held her the way he had always wanted to hold her. She fit against him perfectly, as if they had been designed for each other all along. I love you, he said. The words came easily now, though he had never spoken them to her before. I did not plan to. I did not expect to. But somewhere along the way, between the ceremonies and the emergencies and the small moments, I fell in love with my enemy. Lyra looked up at him with silver eyes that now held warmth instead of ice. And I love you, my strange human. My stubborn, hopeful, impossibly brave husband. She kissed him then. Their first real kiss under the light of alien stars on a world that belonged to both their peoples. Behind them, the colony came alive with the sounds of celebration. Human music mixed with BedHFY songs. Laughter echoed between buildings that had been constructed by workers from both species. Children ran through the streets, human and BedHFY playing together without any understanding of the war that had almost prevented their Friendship. This was what humanity had given the stars. Not weapons, not conquest. Hope. The stubborn, irrational, beautiful belief that tomorrow could be better than today. The refusal to accept hatred as inevitable. The courage to reach out across the darkness and say, I see you. I'm not afraid. Let us build something together. Ethan held his wife close and watched the lights of the colony spread across the darkening land. 3 years ago, he had given up his future to stop a war. Now he understood that he had not given up anything. He had gained everything worth having, and the stars burned brighter because of it.